Welcome to this explainer. If you're a grade 8 student diving into Anne of Green Gables, we're jumping right into chapter 3 today, called Marilla Cuthbert is Surprised. And oh boy, is she ever. We're going to break down that classic expectation versus reality clash that literally changes everything for our main characters.
Here's our quick roadmap for this explainer. We'll look at a beautiful mistake, plunge into the depths of despair, and look at a temporary truce. Plus, we've got a couple of quick checks along the way to test your knowledge. Let's get into it.
Starting off with part 1, a beautiful mistake, the wrong delivery.
So picture this. Matthew has just driven all the way back from the Bright River train station, totally dreading the task of explaining a massive misunderstanding. See, Marilla Cuthbert was expecting a boy. A totally practical choice for heavy farm work back in the early 20th century. But instead, who walks through the door? An odd little girl in a stiff, ugly dress with these long red braids and huge eager eyes. When Matthew opens that door, Marilla literally stops in her tracks in absolute amazement. She ordered a farmhand, right? And instead she got a chattering, highly imaginative little girl. Talk about a mix-up. Which brings us to part 2, the depths of despair and Anne's reaction.
I want you to put yourself in Anne's shoes for just a second. She has been longing for a real home her entire life, so the exact moment she registers Marilla's absolute shock, all that light and glow just instantly vanishes from her face. Once she realizes she isn't wanted simply because she isn't a boy, she just bursts into the stormy fit of tears. With her classic dramatic flair, she flat out declares the whole situation is the most tragical thing that has ever happened to her. And her history really makes this rejection incredibly painful. As we know, Anne has been an orphan since she was a baby. She's bounced around from homes where she was treated way more like a farm worker than an actual kid, and even spent time in an asylum. She has been abandoned over and over again. So when this brand new dream of finally having a home is shattered in an instant, it plunges her straight into what she dramatically calls the depths of despair. She feels completely unwanted. The lump in her throat is actually so big she can't even eat her dinner.
All right, moving to part 3. It's time for a quick check on Anne's reaction. Take a few seconds to think back to Anne's emotional explosion just moments ago. When Marilla's shock makes it super clear that there has been a mistake, how exactly does Anne feel? And what specific words does she use to describe her grief? Well, the crucial point here is that Anne felt deeply depressed, incredibly sad, and completely unwanted. Her heart is just entirely broken, falling perfectly into her own vivid definition of being in the depths of despair. If you remembered that key phrase, you are tracking the narrative perfectly. Great job. Let's jump into part 4, a temporary truce and how the adults react. So, while Anne is upstairs crying her eyes out, the brother and sister have to figure out what on earth to do next. And here we clearly see the clashing worldviews between the siblings. Marilla is the absolute picture of stern practicality. She's sharp, she's brisk, and she wants to correct this error right away. Matthew, on the other hand, is notoriously silent. The text actually tells us he has a somewhat morbid fear of females and pretty much dreads all women. Yet during that carriage ride from the station, he found himself really enjoying Anne's incessant chatter and has become incredibly sympathetic to her situation. But despite Marilla's strict exterior, she isn't heartless. Her heart actually softens just enough by the child's immense, stormy grief to offer a temporary truce. She tells Anne, "We're not going to turn you out of doors tonight." What this means for our plot is that Anne won't be forced to sleep outside or travel back in the dark. She gets one night in the East Gable room. It's a small reprieve, but definitely a critical one. And this brings us to Matthew's really surprising reaction. Completely stepping out of his normally silent nature, he gently advocates for keeping her. He even suggests that, sure, while she might not be of much use to them for farm work, they might actually be some good to her. For Anne, who's been abandoned so many times, Matthew is becoming the very first adult to firmly choose her. He's sparking this quiet little rebellion against Marilla's strict plans. That brings us to part 5. Time for our last quick check, focusing on Marilla's plan. Think about Marilla's highly practical nature for a second. She knows they need a boy for the farm, and she knows a huge error has been made by Mrs. Spencer, the woman who arranged the adoption. So, what does Marilla decide to do about Anne the very next day? Well, if you guessed that she's sending her back, you are absolutely right. Because she strictly wants a boy for the farm work, Marilla decides she's got to investigate the matter personally. Her plan for the following morning is to drive Anne straight back to Mrs. Spencer to correct the error and send Anne right back to the orphan asylum. It is practical, crisp, and completely to the point. I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer for Chapter 3. After witnessing Anne's heartbreaking depths of despair and seeing that tiny glimmer of connection she's already made with Matthew, what would you do next? Could you really be as practical as Marilla and send Anne back to the orphanage tomorrow, or would your heart soften? Keep that tension in mind as you continue studying Anne's journey. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.